I think, to the end. What is toxic is ultimately the neighbor as such, the abyss of the neighbor's desire or obscene enjoyment. So that the ultimate aim of all rules of personal relations is to quarantine or at least neutralize and contain this toxic dimension, to reduce the neighbor to a fellow man. It is thus not enough to search for contingent toxic components in another subject. Maybe subject as such is toxic. And this model is, I think, socialized in the emerging new postmodern racism directed at, let's call them, toxic immigrants. As if in an ironic nod to Giorgio Agamben's theory, in July 2008, the Italian government proclaimed the state of emergency, which still lasts, in entire Italy, in order to cope with the problem of the neighbor in its paradigmatic form today, the illegal entry of the immigrants from North Africa and Eastern Europe. Making a step further in this direction, at the beginning of August 2008, the Italian government demonstratively deployed 4,000 armed soldiers to control sensitive points in big cities, train stations, commercial centers, and thus raise public security. There are now plans to use the military to protect women from rapes, and so on. What is important to note here is that the emergency state was introduced without great fuss. Life goes on as normal. Is this not the state we are approaching in developed countries all around the globe, where this or that form of emergency state against the terrorist threat, against immigrants, is simply accepted as a necessary measure which guarantees the normal run of things? Which is the logic at work here? We should return to a pretty terrifying formula of so-called reasonable anti-Semitism, which was proposed in France in 1938 by the great French anti-Semitic intellectual Robert Brasillach, who saw himself as a modern anti-Semite. Quote from him: "We grant ourselves permission to applaud Charlie Chaplin, a half-Jew, at the movies, to admire Bruce, a half-Jew, to applaud Yehudi Menuhin, a Jew, and the voice of Hitler is carried over radio waves named after the Jew Hertz. We don't want to kill anyone, we don't want to organize any pogrom, but we also think that the best way to hinder the always unpredictable actions of instinctual anti-Semitism is to organize a reasonable anti-Semitism." End of quote. Is this same attitude not at work in the way our governments are dealing with the immigrant threat? After righteously rejecting direct populist racism as unreasonable, unacceptable for our democratic standards, they endorse reasonably racist protective measures. Or, as today's Brazilians, some of them even social democrats, are telling us, we grant ourselves permission to applaud African and East European sportsmen, Asian doctors, Indian software programmers. We don't want to kill anyone, we don't want to organize any pogrom. But we also think that the best way to hinder the always unpredictable, violent anti-immigrant measures is to organize a reasonable anti-immigrant protection. What I fear is that such reasonable racism will get a big boost by the present crisis. Radical multicultural liberals are, of course, terrified by this prospect. But I think their legacy is part of the problem. Why? I want to refer to a book now with which I totally don't agree. It's Jean-Claude Milner's new analysis of the May 68 in France, L'arrogance du présent, the arrogance of the present. But there are some important developments in the book. Milner develops how the French establishment succeeded in undoing all threatening consequences of the May 68 by way of incorporating the so-called spirit of 68 and thereby turning it against the real core of 68. The demand for new rights, which would have meant a true redistribution of power, were granted, but in the guise of permissions. And permissive society designates precisely the way to broaden the scope of what subjects are allowed to do without giving them any real additional power. A nice quote from Milner. Those who hold power know very well the difference between a right and a permission. A right, in a strict sense of the term, gives access to the exercise of a power at the expense of another power. A permission doesn't diminish the power of the one who gives it. It doesn't augment the power of the one who gets it. It makes his life easier, which is not nothing. This is how it goes with the right to divorce, abortion, gay marriage, and so on. These are all permissions masked as rights. They do not change in any way the distribution of powers. Such was the effect of the spirit of 68. It effectively contributed to make life easier. This is a lot, but this is not all, because it didn't encroach upon powers. End of quote. So, in what did more closely this shift in capitalism after 68 events consist? The best description, at least for what went on in France, is probably Boltanski's and Chapello's The New Spirit of Capitalism. The thesis is that from the 1970s onwards, a new figure of the spirit of capitalism is emerging. Capitalism abandoned the hierarchical Fordist structure of the production process and developed a network-based form of organization founded on employee initiative and autonomy in the workplace. Instead of hierarchical centralized chain of command, we get networks with a multitude of participants organizing work in the form of teams or projects, intent on customer satisfaction, and a general mobilization of workers thanks to their leaders' vision. In this way, capitalism is transformed and legitimized as an egalitarian project. By way of accentuating autopoietic interaction and spontaneous self-organization, it even usurped the far left's rhetoric of workers' self-management and turned it from an anti-capitalist to a capitalist slogan. At the level of consumption, this new spirit is the one of the so-called cultural capitalism. We primarily buy commodities, neither on account of their utility, their real properties, nor as status symbols. We buy them to get the experience provided by them. We consummate them in order to make our life pleasurable and meaningful. Consummation should sustain the quality of life. Its time should be, as they put it in California, quality time. Not the time of alienation, of imitating models imposed by society, but the time of the authentic fulfillment of my true self, of the sensuous play of experience, of caring for others, from ecology to charity. Here is an exemplary case of cultural capitalism. Starbucks' self-description of their ethos, like E-T-H-O-S, like ethics, ethos water program. Quote, I mean, after reading this passage, I was tempted to start to be a terrorist and start to throw in Molotov cocktails at Starbucks. Ethos water is a brand with a social mission helping children around the world get clean water and raising awareness of the world water crisis. Every time you purchase a bottle of Ethos water will contribute 5 US cents towards our goal of raising at least $10 million. Through the Starbucks Foundation, Ethos Water supports humanitarian water programs in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. To date, Ethos Water grant commitments exceeded 6.2 million, and so on, and so on, and so on. Of course, they forget to say that this, the manipulation here is breathtaking. That, yes, but in the United States, this water costs $2.50 instead of $2 as it did before. So that they give 5 cents, but immediately they profit 45. But I think they make you feel well. That's the point. This is how capitalism, at the level of consummation, integrated the legacy of 68, the critique of alienated consummation. Authentic experience matters. Is this not why, let me go to the end here, why we buy organic food? Don't fool me. Do you really believe that the half-rotten, expensive organic apples are healthier? I don't. So why are we buying them? Well, it makes you feel good. Instead, you say to yourself, you see, I'm not just a stupid consumer. By buying organic apples, I participate in a meaningful social activity.